Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam, which is a full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, the code podcast gets you 10% off at checkout. Now, let's get started. Today, we got Dr. Justin Grimes from Applied Graduate School with us. And Dr. Grimes, sir, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and just for people who haven't heard you before.
Absolutely. Dr. Justin Grimes, CEO and founder of Applied Graduate School, where we seek to make graduate education more appealing, accessible, and equitable. Our thought is that tomorrow's problems will be solved by today's thought leaders, researchers, and innovators. And at Applied Graduate School, we provide practical strategies and solutions that lead to academic success, no matter your background or role. We work with prospective students, current students, working professionals, institutions, faculty, organizations, and all individuals who are committed to seeking to address any roadblocks impacting graduate education success.
Yeah, fantastic. And so today we're going to be talking about two really important parts of the graduate, basically just like people in general, but also graduate school admissions, right? Which is how race and gender factor into the admissions process. And so where do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess we could start in terms of what are some key factors or things that people need to know about race and ethnicity in graduate education.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So, really, it's important for people to understand that Um, when you fill out the graduate school application, one of the questions that they're going to ask you is related to a few of them, right, about yourself. But some of the key ones that a lot of institutions track is race, gender, race, and ethnicity of individuals who apply. And you might be asking yourself, well, why are we
Mhm.
tracking that information? One, we want to typically know what our enrollments are. It's also often attached and connected to people's accreditation. So, in order for the institution to remain accredited, for certain governing bodies, they ask for this information. There are also organizations that departments, programs are connected to nationally to receive funding. Let's take National Science Foundation, I mean, NSF as an example. Like, they require certain demographic information even when you're applying for certain grants. And so this is important information to track. But why is it relevant and matter to programs? Well, number one, you really want to know, who are what's the makeup and who's present within our program. There are certain awards that were given at one point, right, before we saw a shift and change due to affirmative action around race and ethnicity. And so, um, based on that change, we still will see information being tracked. Now, are you going to continue to see awards given specific to the Latinx community, or race based awards for those who identify as African American women? Like, we may see a change or shift in that, but we don't know what that
Mhm.
information is unless we track information. So that's really an important factor related to race and ethnicity in graduate education, and being able to use this information to make informed decisions around services that are provided, financial awards that are given, and generally understanding who's present in the direction we want to go. It's hard to diversify anything if you don't know what the diversity is.
Right. Well, and I feel like, I mean, especially like post SCOTUS ruling, um, a lot of that stuff has gotten muddy, I guess, on whether it's allowed, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I would say the recent change in affirmative action policy has created some additional conversations and some new strategies being built around that. So, even with current litigation that we see being put forward in many states, around I would say the removal of DEI practices, a lot of that practice of what people conceived and thought about it related to graduate education was around the support programs and events that they provided to individuals based on specific identities. So there's a question of what will happen now as a result of that. Like, do we still need to track this information? if we're no longer doing DEI work, or we're no longer allowed to discuss, support, provide programs that are racial, ethnic based, or gender based. And my response to that is absolutely, we still need to be tracking this information. Number one is, if I fill out the census, it's still going to be asking me these questions. And so we want to make sure that we're in alignment with, again, what I've already mentioned around organizations, our US government census, or just really tracking who's present. And so I don't think we're going to see um, the removal of a whole lot. I think we're going to see the changing of titles and names, but I think there will still be ongoing conversations, particularly around race and gender in higher education. I don't see it going away.
Right. Well, and because it's important, right? I think that that's one of the biggest things that I guess, maybe someone would debate me on this, but I think one of the biggest things that is good about the higher education system is that it does, a lot of institutions do try to walk the walk when it comes to actually helping lift up people from these backgrounds, right? Um, I think that the challenge now is just like, basically you can't make admissions decisions based off of it, which like limits some of your potential ability to help.
Yeah. I think we'll see institutions become more creative in the language that they use and the ways in which they offer services. So, I can take a position that I had at one point where I was working with diversity and inclusion efforts. And so now that I might look like the Office of Belonging, it may look like the Office of Student Programming and Student Support. The work will still be the same for the most part. But the words that we use may have to change and shift, especially depends on what state you're in, what the political commentary and the political legislation is around it. So that is going to change. But are you going to see the removal of Black students because a decision was made around our ability to offer support to Black students? I don't think that's going to necessarily happen. But I think that it's going to become more competitive. And so I'm very interested in conversations around race and gender and how that's going to show up, um, regardless of how, and sex, right? So adding that into it as well. How are we going to continually show, offer and support for people of trans community, cisgender individuals, Black individuals, Latinx, international, and even breaking that down. Like, I hate in higher education how we classify international. It's just, are you outside the U.S.? Put them all in a category. We don't tend to break things down very well in our tracking, or we just tend to look at the dominant countries. But we know that a country is not filled with just one type of makeup or background of individuals. There's a lot of diversity that exists within China, within India, within Southeast Asia, within Africa. So it's
Hmm.
not all the same.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess for sort of the audience here, right? Like I assume that people that are listening are probably looking at applying to graduate school. What advice do you have for them, kind of on these topics?
Yeah. So there are, I would say, definitely two important areas that I think you should consider based on race and ethnicity and gender. Number one is you want to look at any public information or data around who's pursuing the degree at the institution that you're looking at. You want to look at the faculty to see how you see yourself represented, or what they're researching on, what they're discussing. You want to see within the institution how you're represented at the dean level, at the associate dean level, at the executive leadership, at the board, level. Because every individual holds or possesses a bias, and we tend to lean towards and gravitate towards those individuals that have a similarity or likeness to us. And that is often too on the basis of race and ethnicity and gender, right? And so if holding that to be true and our understanding around bias, implicit bias, we know that if we look and see that majority of the deans tend to look a certain way, tend to be from a certain racial ethnic group, it's not to say that they won't be aware, or concerned about the needs of someone different than themselves, but we know it didn't get that way random. And we know that those individuals tend to speak and think about things that are based on the similarities in their experiences there. And so That's something to consider.
Hmm.
The next thing I would tell people to really consider, is look at the supports that are available, not just within the institution, but within the local community. Can you
Hmm.
find healthcare that or a primary care physician who is fluent and well aware of the needs of a person who identifies as trans or a person who identifies as gender
Hmm.
nonconforming or non-binary? What language are you seeing in the supports in the community as well as in the institution in terms of language? Like, I know there's a lot of controversy and people sometimes are uncomfortable talking about inclusive language, but for me it's important, right? So if we are asking and saying in higher education that we want to um, we recognize and value diverse perspectives and needs, then we need to make sure that
Hmm.
our perspectives and our language replicate and showcase that. So look at that, and going back to the data piece, you have to make a decision. If you don't see yourself representing, you've had some conversations, I believe in talking with faculty and asking the question, you know, as a Black individual, talk to me about the particular experiences students who identify as Black have had in your graduate program. What were some of the successes and the challenges they
Hmm.
brought up? And if they don't have an answer for that, take a note of that, right? But also, if
Hmm.
they say we haven't had anyone, think strategically about what that looks like for you to be the first person of
Hmm.
your background. You know, we're having a lot of conversation in higher education around the intersection of both of these identities. And so, what does that look like for you as an Asian woman, you know, who may be queer,
Hmm.
and thinking about how does my queerness show up in my interactions with my advisor, who may not understand what it means to be queer or to be Asian or to be a woman because they identify as a cisgender heterosexual white male. So these are things that people really need to consider before they enter in. And it's not to say the lack of something being physically present in what you see means that it's not valued. It doesn't mean that it's not necessarily going to be
Hmm.
supported. It just means it's just not physically present. But the other end of that is just because it's present doesn't mean that it's always great too, right? So just because you have a
Yeah.
large diversity does not mean that everybody's having a successful experience. Doesn't mean that they're all graduating people and graduating on time, that they're fully funded or supported in the ways that they need. So there's more room for questions for people to ask, and as a person who works with faculty often to try to create strategy around recruitment, I'm very intentional in what I share around making sure that your website reflects the true diversity and honesty of your program, that it showcases what it looks like. One strategy I always give to departments is show me what it looks like to be a student in your program. Show me in a video, show me in web content on your Instagram account. What does it look like? Show me women, show
Hmm.
me men, show me people of different backgrounds, and not to tokenize anybody. This is not about tokenization, but it's to provide a representation so I can see myself, what it looks like. Oftentimes, those of us who are at the margin, we know what it feels like to be at the margin. So we know when we're entering spaces
Hmm.
that might not be as visible or represented in a high number, what that looks like. It's not foreign to us. So we have to make certain negotiations. And now I think is the time for institutions to have to make different negotiations too. To be honest and say, we haven't done
Hmm.
a great job at the diversity and the experiences of people across different margins or different backgrounds. So what do we need to do differently now?
Right. Well, and I think the key thing that you're kind of getting at, or at least to me, the thread kind of tying all this together is like, does the organization care, right? Is this a priority for them, and is this something that they're working on? Because you'd almost rather be at a place that cares, but maybe hasn't had very much of a diverse community in their past, versus a place that has a diverse community but really doesn't care.
Absolutely.
I
And
don't know. It's all like one-off situations, so it's impossible to draw generalizations. But yeah,
yeah.
I think it's still very
And
important.
it's hard to know, right? Sometimes you can see something on the surface, right? That may look appealing, that may seem good, it might have sounded great in the interview or in conversations with people. And then once you actually get in it, it is something different, right? And so one of the things I encourage students is to ask or seek out alums of the program. If you identify for a particular racial or gender group, whether it's a dominant or marginalized group, talk to people who've been through it. What was the experience like for you?
Hmm.
When you think about how you identify as or whatever that is, what showed up? What were the interactions with classmates? How did the faculty respond? When there were national issues existing, right? I like to go back to an example of 2015. In one week we had the Charleston school shooting, I mean, the Charleston shooting, and the next week we had marriage equality. What did that do for people in that moment? As we continually see a lot of things or issues existing in our world, what does that look like for you? And so having conversations with different alums who have gone through different segments of political, personal challenges to really talk to them about how they navigated that and how they felt the faculty responded, and even having the conversations with faculty. I know they're in the position of decision maker, so you really want to, I guess almost tread the line of not pushing back too much, but also being able to ask very authentic questions. It's important to do that, so that who you're interacting with, because you're partnering with another person when you decide to
Hmm.
go jump into graduate school, whether that be an online partnership, in-person partnership, part-time or full-time, it doesn't matter. It's a partnership.
And it's also not just that. It's you know your life to an extent, right? And it's you're dedicating your time and your energy, but you're also associating with that brand
Yes,
going forward, right? And that's part of the reason I really like your suggestion to talk to alumni, because at the end of the day, like I think talking to faculty is good, and hopefully, especially if it's a faculty that shares your background, you'll get a straight answer from them. But I think an alumni from your background will definitely give you a straight answer, particularly about the challenges of your particular situation, right?
absolutely.
Um, like they're gonna be much more straightforward because they know why you're talking to them, and they're like, yeah, I went through that. Like, let's talk about it.
Absolutely. And I tell people to keep in mind that context and time matters, right? So an alum that completed the program in the 90s is going to have a different experience than someone who completed in the 2000s. It's just going to be different. But there may be some overlap that exists there. But it's important to me. I think, talking to people who have been in the place or positions that I'm trying to get to is always valuable, and they have some insight. And so, but I know that the insight has a lot of context. It may have some trauma around it, but no matter what, it's important to gain that. And so I don't think people have enough conversations with alums. I don't think departments do. I don't think they do enough work around engaging their alums. I don't think students, current or prospective, talk to alums enough, but there's value in that. And I wish that we would see more usage of alums in a ways to grow programs, to share and develop. Because to me, I look at it
Hmm.
as when I'm looking at my program, that's what drew me to my program at Georgia's a conference I was at, and I was engaging with current students and alums in the program who on physically looking at them were very different, but they also did a presentation together,
Right.
and I was like, this seems like a really good program. I need to look into this more seriously. And it's just that one event, that one 3 day conference that led me ultimately to decide to apply to University of Georgia um, in my graduate program.
Yeah, conferences are another great way to kind of get a feel for things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because at a bare minimum, you can see who's there, but more likely you can like talk to people and kind of like, just like, even talk to the people that don't look like you, right? Just to kind of get a sense for what they're like, especially like the faculty and the other students.
Oh yeah, I definitely was when I was looking at programs, and I was at a large national conference where I knew that there would be people there. I would go to their events. I would go to the places they were at, because oftentimes you tend to catch people in a more laid back, um, comfortable
Hmm.
situation, and without them knowing exactly who you are, it can actually be pretty helpful. Sometimes to be able to engage in that way.
And then the other thing, I mean, just like going back, excuse me, going back to what you talked about last time, um, or was basically talking about like clubs and organizations. I feel like trying to either get like look them up online or like get an answer from faculty or whoever about like what clubs and organizations exist to support you in that community, I think is really important. It's something that, depending on the school, right? Because Oklahoma, I think, just banned DEI offices at universities, which is ridiculous. But a lot of these schools will actually have like institutional support for these organizations that comes from like those kind of functions.
Absolutely.
So you can probably get answers from them.
Yeah, I definitely always say look at the local organizations and look at what's available to people resource wise because you want to make sure that your needs are being met, right? And so, I
Hmm.
can think about institutions that I work for that have been in rural places and then been in a little bit more metropolitan places. But regardless of the location, um, I was looking for something specific, and so sometimes, certain institutions can be great in terms of research and they may offer great funding, but if they have no social places for you to really engage outside of that, they don't have a true sense of community around your identities and your needs. If it is a place that is often, um, I would say, a circle in which people are coming in and coming out really quickly, who tend to look like you, I don't know if the money is always worth it. I don't know if the offer that is presented in terms of the total package for your graduate program is always worth it. I'm not saying it isn't, but I think there's other
Hmm.
things for people to need to really strongly consider that oftentimes when you're thinking about graduate school, you're not considering that. And even regardless of your enrollment type, like there's a network that comes with every single institution. And so you want to think about how you want to be connected to that network and be represented by that network, but also represent for yourself. Right? You want to make sure that you are seeing yourself and your issues being discussed amongst that group.
Hmm. Well, and right, like the network part, I think is also super important because essentially these are going to be like you in graduate school in particular are, hoping to build like either like a professional or a personal network, usually more the professional side. So are these people you're actually going to want to build a network with? And are these people that are going to respect you, right? And kind of give you the time of day that you deserve in that community?
Absolutely. Especially at the doctoral level, right? I think, when you're connected with your dissertation committee chair, that is a unique relationship and partnership that exists there that hopefully will have some utility and long-standing connection and communication after you finish this process, right? It's not for
Hmm.
everybody. Like some people, it really is just a reciprocal relationship. You did this for me, I do this for you, and we're done. But hopefully, you are beginning to start a relationship and extending your network. When you're doing your graduate degree, I tell people, be intentional with who you connect with the classes that you take, and the services that you use the services, right? So often people are not doing that, and that they may have a particular need around, again, racial or gender or ethnic need, and they don't reach out to the organization or the services that are provided to them. You never know what may be available to you or could be of assistance or help for you until you reach out, and you never know who you're going to connect with. I think about people I went to that I was doing my doctoral degree with, and where a lot of us are now, 6 years later, um, and the services that people have done and they provide. And so now that network, if somebody has a mental health services need, I know several providers. If you have an issue related to math education, I know plenty of people. If you're interested in chemistry or biology, I know plenty of people because that network was there. And that is both what I gained from,
Hmm.
my master's degree, which was online, and my PhD, that was in person. I can think about plenty of people. A good buddy of mine is into drone research, and we did our master's degrees together, um, online, and he was in another program, but we connected through a class that we
Hmm.
took, and so now I'm able to learn a lot about his research and connect him with other institutions that I have relationships with. So the networking is super
Hmm.
important, and I tell people, do not let your background limit you from expanding and reaching out. There's a lot to be learned, a lot to gain from people who look very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the hope, I guess, in all of this
Mm-hmm.
is that, that you're going to get value out of, people that look and act different than you or identify different than you. And so is everybody else, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think that that's like why these institutions pursue diversity. I don't think it's just to score brownie points or whatever you want to call it. Like, I think it's that. there is a lot of value in diverse perspectives, particularly in education.
Absolutely. And we need more, right? Like my hope for
Hmm.
graduate education and higher education as we continue to see, even as the absence of the word diversity is used, that we continually strive to have it exist, right? Like I don't want that in
Hmm.
20 years the deans of 20 years from now look the exact same as the deans of 20 years ago. I want to see more
Hmm.
Latinx people. I want to see more Asian people. I want to see more women and black people in these positions, on these boards as college presidents. I want to see a very different picture of higher ed because of the lived experiences and the research and the work that people have done. I know that, higher education originally, you know, the group that was targeted to pursue higher education were white clergy men. And so higher education looks completely different now in the 2000s than it did in 1700s
Hmm.
and 1800s. And I want to continue to see it evolve. And I think graduate education is a place where we do that. I tell people the future faculty are your current graduate students, and your future graduate students are your current undergraduate and working professionals. So if you want to see diversity in
Hmm.
the faculty, you want to see diversity in the leadership, you probably want to start working intentionally around the diversity you have in undergrad and graduate. You want to make graduate school
Hmm.
appealing. You know, there's a concern around how many people are really going to stay in academia. Well, being married to a tenure track faculty member, I hear and understand some of the concerns that exist there. And some of these conversations aren't had at the
Hmm.
undergraduate level and the graduate school level. So if we want the future to be better for graduate education and expand the reach and access, we've got to start being intentional with who are showing up, into the
Hmm.
application portal and the groups of people. We be more intentional there.
Yeah, absolutely. So then on this topic, is there anything else that you wanted to cover that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to share with people related to
Hmm.
diversity and really understanding race and ethnicity in graduate education is that there are places to go, to find out information. And I tell people look at diverse issues in higher education in their top 100. They put out every single year the top 100 producers of those who identify as minorities. So, and they do that based on race and gender. So I encourage people to look at that. I encourage people to look at the American Council on Education. They have a lot of reports around graduate credentials by race and ethnicity. They also break it down by completion and by award level, STEM and non-STEM. And also, I tell people to remember that we still have a lot of firsts. You know, we have a
Hmm.
lot of people who are still being first, and that concerns me. As a graduate educator, that there are individual programs that are still having their first, especially they've been in existence for a number of years. So I encourage people to think differently about that. And so to put on my push and nudge to faculty is develop intentional recruitment, admissions, and support strategies. Like I know that in most
Hmm.
graduate programs, you're probably not learning a model about recruitment, right? Nobody's teaching you how to do that, or they might not be teaching you how to offer student support or understand mental health because that wasn't your background. But it's important to learn that information and be intentional. And that's the work that I do, really helping people develop a strategy that is going to help you to recruit the HBCU student, the student from a minority serving institution, to recruit more women into biology, to recruit more men into counseling and psychology and education. Like that's the work that I'm really passionate about doing is helping people to figure that out because they don't have it and they're relying
Hmm.
on doing the same things over and over again, which is really insanity, right? Hoping to get the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result, and they're not getting a different result. And so I want people, faculty, to be more intentional. I want institutions to hold themselves accountable to be better at diversifying and not allowing legislation or political pressure stop them from seeing the greater good around having diverse perspectives. And for students, I want you to really challenge yourself to put yourself in environments that are going to help you grow, to be in programs that are going to be
Hmm.
filled with people who look different than you, but also do not put yourself in harm, right? So I don't think that always you have to
Hmm.
go be the person and be aware of things of tokenization and racisms and gender discrimination and phobias. They exist, right? Human beings hold bias and they have particular experiences and knowledges that may not always be rooted in truths. or be rooted in a variety of understanding. And so sometimes your presence helps to grow people and helps you grow, right? And so I think that's the value of
Mhm.
graduate education, is to be able to go into a specific field in around a specific topic or interest area and add your knowledge to it. And the last piece I will share people is we need you, right? I think we don't get to greater discovery, we don't get to greater creativity and innovation without more perspective. And I think the graduate level and the graduate school is where we get a lot of that. It takes place.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, it is, graduate school is still, I think you said it was like 60% white at least
Yes.
at this point,
Yeah.
right? It's still, yeah, so it's still like I think it's I don't know what the undergraduate statistics are, but I'd imagine that it's still lagging behind a little bit, and so it is going to be like you said, like on the one hand, right? Like don't put yourself in harm's way. Um, but it's unlikely that you're gonna find like the unicorn perfect place where everyone's exactly like you in graduate school, unfortunately. Like, and that's part of the problem. But um, certainly you can. I really like your take where it's like, it's also about personal growth. And the other thing too is frankly like some of these other people in your program probably need a little personal growth
Oh,
themselves.
everybody needs it,
But
right? Yeah. I don't want my
yeah, it
world
hurt.
to be centered around people who look like me, think like me, and who look like me. Because I know how I think and
Mhm.
operate. But imagine what we could create, what would come about, what we would learn if we had people who were different than ourselves, and some people who have some similarities. I think it's good to have a group of both that are present.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. I think the toughest thing is to be first. That's always super hard. But
Absolutely.
if you even have a few people that you can connect with, I think that makes a big difference, which is part of the reason why like the campus visits or the events is so important. Or talking to people who are alumni who are represented, like you feel like, or represent you, or at least will give you a straight answer. I think that's all really helpful because does it does make a big difference to kind of have even some community there versus none, I think. And I also think that it makes a big difference to have that organizational support like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And sometimes, even in the absence of organizational support, you can find community support. And I think they really go hand in hand.
Hmm.
I'm really big on, particularly those who decide to uproot and go do it full time, to really look at the connections of what you can do both inside and outside of the institution.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to cover here, or you feel like we've got everything at this point?
Yeah, I think for the most part I've covered everything. If folks have questions about applying to graduate school or really working through and thinking through what this process looks like for them, definitely, look at the book, 20 questions to answer before you apply to graduate school. Go to our website, applytograduateschool.com. Send me a message, LinkedIn, social media, I'm around. So I'm happy to answer questions. And my goal again is, as I stated from the beginning, our goal is to make graduate education more equitable and accessible to all individuals who want to achieve it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Dr. Justin Grimes from Apply to Graduate School. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free at achievable.me and use the code podcast if you like it to get 10% off.